Hi folks, in this video I'll be reviewing the Secrets of Magic for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Paizo was kind enough to send us a copy to review, and I've had a couple of flip-throughs of it, and first of all, I really like this book. I think if you're a player that enjoys playing magic casters, or you're a game master who kind of wants to maybe add some different magical traditions, or just have a better understanding of the current magical traditions, this is a great book to pick up. First of all, the artwork in it is gorgeous. It feels cohesive with all of the rest of the Paizo Pathfinder books. I do like that, kind of different in this book, the border on the pages is unique and different, and I feel still feels like the Pathfinder world, but adds a nice kind of different touch to it than I've seen in most of the other books. There are 5 chapters in this book: the essentials of magic, the classes, spells, magical items, and then Book of Unlimited Magic. So let me dive into each of these chapters with a little bit more detail. Chapter 1 offers an expanded explanation for each of the traditions and schools of magic. And I like that all of these are written kind of as in-world excerpts from actual in-world books. Each of them has its own kind of unique voice, and because they're authored by different people, fictional authors, and I liked that aspect. So it adds not only little bit of lore, but also just a better understanding of how each of these different traditions and then sub-schools of magic function. Now, little design note that I wasn't a huge fan of. Some of these are written are printed in a different text. Not all of them, which I think I would have preferred if they were all in their own unique text, or were just all in the standard, whatever the standard text is, of the Pathfinder books. The ones that were in the alternate fonts, a couple of them I found a little difficult to read. Just the readability of those fonts isn't as easy. In particular, I'm gonna probably butcher this name, Javin Vresht piece. I really struggled to read this font. Now, if you're an individual who does not have dyslexia, unlike me, you might find it easier to read some of these fonts. But that's just a small accessibility thing that I think maybe wasn't thought through as far as the design went. However, these are sections that you aren't going to need to go back and reference very quickly. So, maybe sacrificing a bit of the readability for a little bit more flair was worth it. I just wasn't a huge fan of that choice. However, the actual writing was great. I also like that in this section it gives you signs, so it gives you the color, the animal, the plant that's associated with each school of magic. I don't really think these are anything that's going to greatly affect the utility of those magical schools, but it adds just a nice world building idea for the game master, or kind of character building for players that you can incorporate. Maybe, okay, this wizard follows the evocation school, so they will wear that color and maybe have the leaves from the plant that is associated with that school woven into their clothing, or perhaps the game master can incorporate some of those things into bits of the world. So you might be able to look at somebody and know what school of magic they use by kind of what their clothing might look like, or how they decorate their house, or what plants they have outside of the school. That was just a nice little flair element there that I think, again, it's less the rules of the system, but can play more into perhaps the exploration and roleplay aspects of the game. Chapter 2 gets into the new classes, which I know this is something a lot of people are excited about because it introduces the Magus and the Summoner class, which existed in 1st edition of Pathfinder, but now they're available in 2nd edition. The Magus class is a much more combat-oriented spellcaster because you cast through either your weapon or your body by punching people. This is a class that, like, if you want to build a utility or support character, don't pick this class. It's very combat oriented, while there are aspects of the class that do lend itself to exploration or a little bit of more of the utility knowledge base. That's not really where this class is going to shine. I really like the spell strike aspect of this class because you can cast a spell with one or two that has one or two actions by making a 2-action attack. So you can be like, haha, I attack you with my sword, and I cast a spell on you as well. And especially if you're casting a 2-action spell, you essentially like gain an extra action, because instead of attacking with an action and then using those 2 remaining actions to cast a spell, you've used the 2, and then you have a third that you can be like, haha, and now I'm going to run over here, or I'm going to do something else. So that's a cool, I think that class is really cool. You could kind of get some aspects of this class by multi-classing with, a couple of different classes, but if you really want a combat-focused spellcaster, this is the class for you. And then the Summoner. While there are a lot more like summoning spells in the spell chapter, which I'll get to in a moment, this class is focused on summoning a very specific Eladon. I'm probably saying that wrong. I just read it. And each one you get to pick kind of what form it takes. And it's not just as you level up, you get to summon like stronger creatures. So it's not just like, oh, I can summon a higher CR monster from the monster manual. But you actually level up your Eladon as you level up. They get feats and you can customize them as you're going. And there are a lot of abilities that kind of function with you doing something along with the Eladon that you have summoned. Also, there's not a duration on when you summon it, like a lot of summoning spells where it only stays around for X many rounds. It stays. Once you've summoned it, you have it until you kind of send it back into the extra dimensional space or other plane, until you need it again. So that's really cool. If you're looking to play a summoner, pick up this book. Now, I will say with both the Summoner and the Magus, you have less spell slots than some other magical classes, which is the trade-off for some of the other abilities, as well as you get to kind of auto-heighten your spells as you're going. So like the Magus, like you kind of just always cast max level spells. So that's a little bit of the trade-off there. As I mentioned before, there's a spell chapter. So this has a lot of new spells. Obviously, specifically spells for the Magus and the Summoner classes, but also just kind of general, all of the different traditions and expanded spell list that you can add for any magical class. There's also some ritual spells in there along with new focus spells. One of the cool new spell types that gets added are contingency spells. Now, there aren't a ton of these spells, but the few that are really cool, and it's things that you cast that have a fairly long duration. Most of them, it's like a day. It's 24 hours. And then it has something that triggers the spell actually going into effect. One of them that I think is really cool is the instant armor, which is you can send your armor into an extra dimensional space, and then with one action, summon it back. You basically like snap your finger, and I suddenly have armor on. So, that's great if you're trying to like sneak into a situation and don't want to take a stealth bonus or a penalty because you're wearing a plate armor or something like that. Or I'm going into a ball where we might cause a fight to break out, but I'm gonna look pretty weird walking into the ball in full leather armor. So that's a cool spell, and a couple of the other contingency spells are pretty cool. I want to give a special thanks to all of our patrons, especially Arvi. If you want to support our channel, help us make more videos, you can head on over to patreon.com/rollforinitiative and check out the perks of being a patron. The next chapter goes into magical items, and at the end of the chapter they have expanded more traditional magical items, permanent magical objects, as well as the consumable magic objects such as potions. There are some more options there, but also it adds a bunch of new kinds of magic items. First is the Fullus, and these are just kind of paper charms that you can add to weapons, armor, places that give some kind of magical boost to whatever it is. Next up are Grimoires. They're spell books. Yay. I don't have a whole lot to add there. There also are now magical tattoos. This is really cool, especially if you wanted to tat up your character. They can have magic tattoos, as well as there's like a feat to be able to give others magic tattoos. The personal staves is an interesting new kind of system for creating a magical staff that has spells stored in it. And initially when I was reading it, I was like, this could be kind of broken or overpowered, but each staff has to have a trait associated with it, so you can only load up spells with that trait into it. So if you have like a fire staff, any spell has to have the fire trait. If you have transmutation, it has to have the transmutation trait. And then they also are pretty expensive to make, so that kind of balances out to you're not going to end up with like a level 1 character that has a ridiculous amount of spells stored in his stave. Another thing that I thought was really cool are the spell catalysts. So these are consumables that are associated with a specific spell or group of spells that amp up the spell. So you can choose to have the catalyst get consumed when you cast the spell to add on additional effects. And then the final new thing are spell hearts, which function pretty much as talismans, except for they don't get consumed once you've used them. They are permanent. So these are things that you can add to weapons and armor to add a little bit of a boost to them. All right, now we're into the last chapter, which is such a cool chapter, the Book of Unlimited Magic, which introduces a lot of alternate forms of magic. This is a chapter that I feel like is very focused towards the game master. A number of these forms of magic you could incorporate into an individual character, but I think they're definitely things that you would want to discuss with your game master to make sure it works within the rest of the game. So there are a few of these that I was a little less interested by, so I'll just kind of do a quick summary of those and not go into a lot of detail on them. They might be up your stream. They just weren't things that I was quite as interested, so I'm going to focus on the ones that I was more interested in. The first in the chapter is cathartic magic, so this is magic that's fueled by emotions. I think maybe similar to like a barbarian rage type thing, but not just like I get angry and I can cast spells, but there is an emotional trigger to casting your spells. Interesting. Meh. The next one, flexible preparation, I thought was really interesting and can especially be good if you're the type of person that you're always playing a spellcaster that prepares their spells and feel like I never pick the right spells for the day. You get less spells per day, but you can cast any of the spells that you know. This is one that can be tweaked, that maybe an individual player picks up this alternate magic, and I think it can easily kind of blend into however the magic works in the greater world. I skipped over elementalism, which is basing off of the 4 different elements. This does feel like a magic tradition that lends itself to monks and druids, and it's written kind of that way in the text. But I do like that there is a feat that allows you, any class, to pick up this kind of alternate tradition. Geomancy essentially offers like favored terrain for rangers to spellcasters, where you can attune to the terrain and get kind of bonuses for attuning to the terrain. Leylines follows the idea that there are certain kind of rivers of magic, areas where magic runs stronger throughout the world, and so you can attempt to tap into these ley lines to amp up your casting, although if you fail at successfully tapping in, there are consequences, so it does kind of feel like a balanced way of having the potential to amp up your magic. And this is also one that I think works a little bit better if it is incorporated in a broader sense than necessarily an individual player. Next is the one that I feel like is much more, is the game master has to be on board, and like the entire table, like this is a world building tradition, and that is pervasive magic. It's the idea that magic kind of exists everywhere. There's a certain level of it's everyday, it's mundane, like the barkeep can cast magic, creatures can cast magic, terrain has magic, and so this chapter, or this section of this chapter, is geared a little bit more towards the game master. It does have how to adjust the individual characters, but it also has how to adjust monsters, creatures, as well as terrain, which I thought the terrain was a cool addition there. Shadowcasters, not really as much up my boat. You get access to shadow magic by giving up a piece of your soul and access to light. Cool if that's your thing. I was a little less interested in that. Along with soul seeds, there are like relics that can attach to your soul and give you special abilities. Now, I did think this was a cool, like, perhaps reward for, overcoming a particular mythical or legendary type beast, or completing a quest, stuff like that. Not something that I think I would personally tie into my games quite as much. Soul-forged armament, you have a like magical weapon or armor that is bound to you through an oath, so I could see a paladin, this working really well with them. Again, not quite as much up my boat, but if you're interested in it, check it out. There's a section on Thessalonian rune magic, which, as somebody who's currently playing through Rise of the Rune Lords, I thought was interesting, added a little bit more knowledge of the various rune schools, as well as just a little bit of more info about the Rune Lords. So if you want to embrace a little bit more of that Thessalonian rune magic into your game, yay! True Names runs off of the idea that everything has a true name, and by knowing the actual names of things, you have power over them. Cool concept. I could see this being a really cool world building. Again, one that I was a little less interested in. However, the last one, the Wellspring magic, seemed like a really fun alternate magic method, and that is the idea of like certain characters have just this like overflowing magic that will kind of well up in them, so you get to regain spell slots throughout the day, which is pretty cool. But there is the trade-off of you might at times have a surge, too much magic, and so you roll on a table, and some of them might be beneficial, some of them definitely not. So this is something that I can see, like, if you're a min-maxer, you're probably not going to want to follow this tradition. But if you like having great stories at your table of, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this happened, or adding just that, like, slight element of chaos into your games, I think this might be a fun magic tradition to incorporate. All right, that's my review of The Secrets of Magic. If you've picked up the book, I'd love to know your thoughts down below. And also, which of the new alternate forms of magic interest you the most? I'd love to hear that down in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe, because we make videos here every week all about tabletop RPGs and our other geeky interests. And we'll see you next time on Roll for Initiative. Bye! Book of Unleashed.